Good evening, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I get to share the stage tonight with our main speaker, architect and Professor Toshiko Mori. As introduced, my name is Nader Tehrani, and it's my honor to serve as the Dean of the Irwin S. Chanin School of Architecture, which is Toshiko's alma mater, and indeed the seat of John Haydock, Toshiko's professor and the dean of the school for over 3 decades, something that I believe has impacted her dearly. Toshiko Mori is the founding principal of Toshiko Mori Architects and the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in the practice of architecture at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Born in Kobe, Japan, beyond her degree at Cooper Union, Toshiko also holds an honorary degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. I myself received my early training as a teacher at the GSD, and indeed, I get to credit much of what I do today because of the mentorship that I received from Toshiko. I taught under her wings in a course on material agency, and later, in my last year at Harvard, Toshiko was kind enough to pass one of her courses on to me focused on architectural dialogues with great structural engineers of our time. And I credit much of the later work I've done in the last 10 years as a result of these courses, a shift from design in the abstract to structure as a catalyst for design itself. These topics remain central to Toshiko even today, and she continues to teach advanced seminars on material exploration, structural innovations, and the role of architects as agents of change in a global context. Her most recent seminar is titled Material, Atmosphere, and Ambience. Her recent studios have brought students to Helsinki, Fukuoka, Kyoto, and Senegal, challenging students to consider local contexts and community interests in their design. She participates in international symposia and conferences and has lectured at universities across the country and around the world. Recently, she was the keynote speaker at the AN Facades and Symposium and the Dassault Systems Design in the Age of Experience conference at Milan Design Week in 2019. She's also regularly invited to international juries. Her projects have been the focus of several books, including Toshiko Mori Architect of Monticelli Press, Cloudline of Hadje Kanse, and Immaterial Ultramaterial, the result of another exhibition we shared together at Harvard, and really that was the transformative moment of my pedagogy. Additionally, she has contributed to numerous books and was the bi-monthly contributor to Japan Architect. Her writing has appeared in A+U, The Plan, and the World Economic Forum Agenda blog, among other publications. She's won numerous awards, including the Academy Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the AIA New York Chapter Medal of Honor, the 2016 ACSA Tau Sigma Delta National Honor Society Gold Medal, and is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She most recently received the 2018 Maine in America Award and the AIA ACSA Topaz Medallion for Excellence in Architectural Education, and the Longhouse Reserve's Longhouse Award, and will receive the OMI Arts Leadership Award in 2019. She also serves on the board of directors for the Dassault Systems and is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanization. Ladies and gentlemen, the accolades are many, but behind them is the work of an architect that is deeply invested in certain ethics that have defined a life's work focused on building craft, building community, and building intellects through a constant focus on new pedagogies. Heralded as the first woman to become the chair of the Harvard Graduate School of Design from 2002 to 2008, what is remarkable about the era to which she gave rise was a focus on pedagogy itself. How we teach, how we engage the world through that which we teach, and how teaching becomes part of a social contract that binds communities together. Toshiko is an architect of extraordinary talents, a character on the world stage, but for me, she's simply a dear friend, a mentor, and a role model. So please help me in welcoming Toshiko to the stage.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for such an amazing, heartfelt introduction, and thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight. And it's an auspicious day, as you know. It's the first day of the first Reiwa era in Japan. So it's a coincidence, but I'm very much honored to be speaking in Japan Society on May 1st under a new emperor and empress. So thank you. And as it's amazing because what I'm going to talk about tonight is about a specific regional culture in western part of Japan called Setoguchi region, where artists and architecture worked together after World War II, after enormous amount of devastation, and many of the cities destroyed, 80%, 70% of cities, sometimes close to 90%, and then how artists and architects got together and struggled to build the post-war world Japan. It has also to do with exchange of ideas, generosity to each other, and then also teaching each other and then developing new generations. So I think my relationship to NADAAA owe a great deal to our predecessors who, by example, showed us how to rebuild the country, how to rebuild the culture, how to think of the next generation and how it impacts the future. So some of you might know, but the area, I think, is what I'm going to talk about, centered mostly in Takamatsu, in Shikoku, but all around a region called Setoguchi, Seto Inland Sea. It's a very beautiful sea, historic, very famous for ship transports and seafaring, and then, of course, fishery. And there were pirates that used to exist in some parts of it, Murakami pirates, there are benign pirates, and then it's a very historic area. So it's centered around Setoguchi Sea. It's like a little bit of a miniature Mediterranean in Japanese peninsula. This particular idea of encouragement for architecture started after post-World War II. And of course, it goes back to Hiroshima, which was bombed. And then some of the earliest modernist architecture starts there as a competition for World Peace Memorial Cathedral, which was won by Togo Murano and built and finished in 1954. The competition was around the late 40s, but the whole idea of this competition was that there was not a first place, and Tange ended up a second place, and Murano was in a jury, so it's been quite a controversy as to how he got this job, but he actually, Murano confesses a year before he died that he actually have done this pro bono, and then that he realizes that a priest in this cathedral wanted modern architecture, but something which might have some appeal to the populace and did not wish for innovative structures that may be monumental and impressive. So he heard that wish and he decided to dedicate his work. So the building looks like that. In a sense, it's an amazing combination of Japanese aesthetics and some of the Catholic motifs. You can see the windows as Japanese motifs. And so this is the results. So this was the first building to build. And the reason it was complete in 1954 is in Japan, between 1937 and 50s, there was forbidden, also it's forbidden to build with new materials, but there was a shortage. So it was not possible to build with concrete. And then second competition and concrete or modern materials. So around 54 and 55, when Kenzo Tange's Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum was completed. He also won these competitions in 40s in his late 30s. So he was very, very young. This project made him put his name on the map. And at the same time, he was collaborating with Isamu Noguchi with his balustrade. As you may know the famous story, he has also designed a memorial for this park, but because him being a Japanese American, the government did not want to put quote unquote American as a sculpture, as a commemorative. So it was Noguchi felt he was very much hurt by it, but Tange ended up designing the memorial for this. What's significant about this memorial is that Tange designed a park itself. And in it, this planning, he meant for his view, you can see in the middle bay, the view of Hiroshima Dome, which he willed to be preserved as destroyed so that people will remember it, history will not be erased. What's amazing about it is the preservation plan for this dome was approved 17 years after Tange completed a plan. So in the sense that he was insistent this should be preserved as a memory. And for a lot of extent, it's not just a building, but this enormous park which becomes a democratic public space was important for him. And he called it a place of peace factory. Going back to this idea, why did he have this amazing association with Hiroshima? He was born in Shikoku, in Ehime, Imabari, and then he went to high school in Hiroshima. And many of his classmates died as a bombing, and he was on a train coming back from University of Tokyo because his father was ill. And before he gets home, his father dies. Around the same time Hiroshima was bombed with an atomic bomb, his mother's house was bombed, so his mother dies. So he loses his parents at the same time, and then classmates, and therefore he has this will in which he wants to do something through reconstruction, and he at the time, very young, like 7 members from his lab from University of Tokyo goes there, volunteers to reconstruct Hiroshima before he was anybody, before he entered the competition. And at that time, you can imagine, area was radioactive, it was dangerous. In his diary, he says he did not have enough food to eat, but everybody was drawing so much about the future dreams of Hiroshima. So there's a lot of investment on Tange's part about this particular project. And after this project, the area was commissioning Tange in Ehime Prefecture Hall. That's area he's from. Amazing, it's actually a concrete shell structure. You will see later in parts of Naoshima and Teshima some projects which is recall of this, and some architects does attribute this. This is one of a very first long span shell structure, and it's amazing structure in itself. It was demolished, unfortunately. And also, he was commissioned in 1958 to do Imabari City Hall. So there was this amazing boom for municipal government to support contemporary and young architects to build a symbol of a new democracy of Japan. In 1957, Tange wins a competition to build a Tokyo government or prefecture hall. So this was demolished. This is now, as you know, it's a site of Tokyo Forum, which is designed by Raphael Vignoli. But then much later on, he goes on to win again competition to do a new city, new Tokyo prefecture hall in Shinjuku area. So this history continues. Also around the same time, they were commissioning Masatsune Matsumura for a Hizuchi Elementary School, and some of you might know this has just won Nobel Prize, while Monument Fund has been widely published. And this was commissioned 56 and 68, and this architect has really devoted himself for building schools. And he is the contemporary, he's actually exact same age as Tange, so there's this idea of fairly young architect, late 30s and early 40s, to rebuild the cities and schools that stays today. And Kenzo Tange goes on to build Kurashiki City Hall in 1960, which still exists. It's an amazing, what you might call brutalist, but in a sense, very lyrical brutalist building, as we recall. And someone like Junzo Sakakura was commissioned to do Kure City Hall in 1962. So there's a huge motive by municipalities to hire these architects. So in a sense, it really became, besides Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, center of activities for young architects. And I will actually talk a little bit more focused on Takamatsu, which is in Kagawa Prefecture. And Kagawa Prefecture is the smallest prefecture in Japan, but then it has this richest legacy in terms of arts and architecture, which continues today. And I have to emphasize it's because it owes to this Seto region's patronage, which happened post-World War II, and those type of spirit continues on. And then this is Takamatsu, and it's a city and which has historical background, such as Yashima, which was a site of a Heike and Genji battle in 1185. And that's pretty early because shogunate Genji Minamoto shogunate was founded in 1192. So this battle had taken place. Also, this area is a pilgrimage site. There are 88 temples in Shikoku. You even see today this pilgrimage. And it's because it's a center of a Shingonshu sect. And if you go upstairs, even Matsuda Yutaka's paintings, he shows this white circle which Shingonshu uses for meditations. So there's something mystical about this Shikoku area in essence. And it is also the birthplace of Kukai. And this was the early 9th century priest, and he's gone to China to train themselves and founded Shingonshu, which is probably one of the biggest and most powerful sect in Japanese Buddhism. At the same time, someone like Haruki Murakami always, if you are a fan of his novels, refers to Shikoku as somewhere mystical. The characters always talks about it. Yes, there's some devious acts done on cats and so forth, but in any case, Kafka on the Shore does take place in a fictional library in Takamatsu. And if you know about this character, Kafka travels and there's a librarian named Saeki-san. And then Sayaki is the last name of Kukai family. So there's always that reference of contemporary writers about this mystical aspect of Shikoku region. Also, the region is very rich with food, udon. Kagawa is famous for udon. And I have to encourage them, don't just promoting udon. Please promote art and architecture also. And I think they also like this idea. And then also crafts. The crafts is very rich. It's because Matsudaira clan has promoted Ritsurin Koen, which is one of the biggest parks. And they were actually inviting many of the gardeners, craftsmen, woodworkmen, and also stone masons to this area to train and replicate some of the crafts which may be possible in Kyoto and develop that. And it's really unique in terms of if you ever go to Ritsurin Koen, training pine trees, like really strange pine trees. And this region is a center for bonsai cultivation, which is miniaturized trees, and that's art in itself. So there's this incredible artistry going on at the same time. And inside of this area, this particular room in Ritsurin Koen, this is actually something Tange has seen and tried to replicate in Kagawa Prefecture Hall interior. This open plan and idea of it is very interesting. And for Shinto, there's a Kompira shrine, which you have to go 758 steps. I was just there in February taking my students because we are looking at this Kagawa Prefecture as analysis of why this is happening with Center of Art and Culture, and also our students is proposing new use for one of obsolete building of Tange. They had to walk 758 steps to see this view. One of the reasons why Kagawa Prefecture was so lively and active in a critical era of a recovery of Japan is this due to this governor, Kaneko. And he was a governor six terms for 24 years. And he was called the design governor also, or artistic. And he also is the one who hired Tange to design prefecture building, which is one of our seminal, in my opinion, one of the best buildings. And the reason they were able to do such a spectacular building is cast in place concrete is not because technological advance, but because of scarcity of materials. At that time, they didn't have big machinery. Everything was done by hand. In Japan, there are skilled craftsmen, wood craftsmen, and you think that how is the skilled craftsman relate to concrete? It's because concrete depends on how the formwork is made. So if you can imagine if a concrete formwork is made at the skill level of expert craftsmen, you can do some amazing, thin, precise concrete buildings. And this is what happened. Later on, Iro Saarinen came and looked at it, and he was absolutely astounded. And at the same time, for this building, there's such a scarcity that governor wanted to employ out-of-work people to lay stone one by one on the ground level. And also he employed the widows from World War II to help clean the building. And therefore, this building to this day is impeccably maintained. These widows only retired recently. So they took care of it. It's really one of the best maintained buildings. But currently what they are doing is that they have invested nearly 40 million US dollars to upgrade it. So this is what they're doing. They're digging below ground and they're completely upgrading it. And the building was still very useful because it's open plan. And they were able to densify, squeeze in. Of course, they had to build a huge building next to it, but the use did not become obsolete. It's square plan, it has its equal orientation to all the side. And Pillar T, the ground floor, is completely open to public. So this idea of openness, accessibility, invitation was very important aspects. And you can see Isamu Kenmochi is an important Japanese interior designer, collaborated with Tange to do all the furniture. And most important person here is the artist here on the mural, Kenichiro Inokuma. And he is a classmate of Governor Kaneko from Marugame High School. So he was basically governor's advisor, and he advised the governor to invite Tange. He made an arrangement. Somehow he actually happened to have them meet in the same boat coming from Osaka. They were in the same cabin, and oh my goodness, this is Tange, this is Kaneko, please meet. And he kept telling his friend, he was an upperclassman from Kaneko, he would order the governor, you have to do a great building or else I won't be friends with you anymore. So he was like, this is the architect to hire. So he was very much responsible of it, and that's actually mural he has done. Also, besides that, there was a Tadashi Yamamoto, who is a very important figure because he was a city architect and he helped Tange build this. He had coordinated with the artists, and then later on he worked extensively with Noguchi to do the Noguchi Gardens with him. And then for this building, he did another mural with discarded broken tiles depicting scenes of agriculture of the era. This story is important for me for my own project later on, but this is an example of Genichiro Inokuma and some of this. And comes to Isamu Noguchi, who is also introduced by Inokuma to Kaneko, Governor Kaneko. He was working on UNESCO gardens in Paris, and he came to Japan in this area in 1956 to look for stones. And Inokuma introduced him to the governor, saying that you should talk to him, you should introduce him to some of the stones in the prefecture. So Japan is not known for stone culture, but Kagawa happened to have some of the best stones. And I have to say, the biggest fabrication for gravestones are still in Kagawa. They have a best quality craftsman, best quality stones called Aji stone. And then Noguchi was very much interested in it. And then he was seeing all these stone quarries and fabricators. He was absolutely fascinated. And he came back in 64, and governor takes him around the new Tange building. In 69, he starts work with Izumi-san there, who is a stonemason, and he establishes his own workshop there. So nearly for more than 20 years in the later part of his life, he'll go back and forth between New York atelier and this atelier in Murray, Japan, to make his sculpture. So Izumi-san is a fabricator and a partner of him, Noguchi. Well, Tange was very sad when Noguchi died, and he went on his own to this garden. He was a president of board of directors, and he actually made a plan to leave everything as is when he died, so that this particular garden and museum is preserved everything, the way he left the tools, the positioning, the placement of sculpture is left as he left it, so that you can actually experience what it was like exactly when he was alive. And whenever you visit there, if you get a chance to visit, it's incredibly moving because you can imagine his presence and what he was doing, some sculpture finished, some not, and then going back and forth. And I took my students to this place, and then that's me, and with my Harvard students, we are doing this project. And then here we are with Izumi-san, who is still alive, who actually gave a talk at Noguchi Foundation in April. And he's still fabricating. He continued to collaborate with other people on projects. Another artist, very important, is Masayuki Nagare, who established his stone studio in Ajicho. Aji is a stone. This is near Yashima, amazing stone, in 1962. And then he's been working with an atelier, and he has a spiritual side about him. His parents are founder of Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, very much interested in spiritual and Shinto. And then a lot of people will call him samurai artist because he had this spiritual idea of really looking through the stone ideas. And that's his studio, which is now a museum. And New Yorkers are familiar with his Cloud Fortress, which was at World Trade Center, which survives 9/11, but it did not survive the reconstruction. So it's gone now, but I'm showing Inokuma also worked a lot in New York. And if I can go back to it, the mural you saw in Kagawa Prefecture Hall, he had plans because Tange was writing him lots of letters, how's the mural coming, he's not coming. So Tange comes to New York in 57, and he finally gets a plan. So, Kuma actually conceived the mural for Kagawa Prefecture Hall in New York. So there's this interesting relationship. I'm saying all this because a relationship, how global the exchange between artists and architects with this particular very specific region in itself. Another one we are familiar, the furniture here is full of it. George Nakashima was invited to visit there by Masayuki Nagare. And he was very much impressed with the skill level and the wood furniture. And many of his furniture is actually installed in Ritzling Koen itself as a historical artifact, well, incredibly revered. And Sakura fabricators, who are still fabricating his furniture, is the only one authorized outside the United States, where he has his own studio, is still there, has his ideas. Well, like when we were there, we were amazed to see this particular cafe called Eye of Castle still existing, because inside of this castle is a prototype of a wall built by Nagare and Kunio Maekawa for 1964 New York Expo. And this is what that looked like. So, so there's a lot of things going on in 64 as I can go around it. So this was actually a prototype. And then, lo and behold, the same sisters who opened the cafe are still working there. And then serving us coffee, and she has full of stories. You can imagine this is a cafe where Noguchi was there, Inokuma was there, Tange was there, and they were very proud. They said, our coffee is the best because all my clients are impeccable at taste, and we couldn't serve them back coffee. And they said, I get it. So, and it's full of furniture, full of artifacts, and still this, I think, Tadashi Yamamoto designed lighting fixtures there and so forth. So in 64, the same time, this round thing is actually Kagawa Prefecture gym designed by Tange for Kagawa. And this was the same year as Expo, New York Expo was happening here. This is another amazing structure. And unfortunately, it became obsolete, meaning that the roof is too low for volleyball games. And then there are new competitions, and Sana won a new gymnasium. So this is actually going through uncertain fate. The prefecture has a budget actually to restore it, and they couldn't get a bidders to do it because everybody's too busy with the Olympics. So in a sense, it's a very interesting idea, and my students, we are coming up with ideas for new programs for it currently. And at Harvard, we actually have acquired Tange Archives, which is great for us, but unfortunate for Japan because there's no university, no place equipped to conserve his drawings. So as a custodian for such important documents, it's being progressively conserved and digitized. It's actually, if you go to a website for Harvard libraries, you can access them digitized, it's open source. So in a sense, it's actually for the serving of our communities. And our students are very lucky because they go downstairs, they can look at original drawings. And if you're interested, I really suggest it because it's an incredible set of drawings, all hand-drawn, impeccable. Digitize is one thing, but really see the tactility of these original drawings and amazing. So what's interesting about this building is that it was built at the same time as Yoyogi Olympics. So it's actually much smaller. So you have a strange twin. One is a country twin, another one is city boy. And interiors kind of difference one way or the other. And at the same time, 1964, he works on St. Mary's Cathedral. So 64 becomes a very important era, very productive era. And everybody's very much worried about preservation of your own architecture. Kenzo Tange collaborated with the priests and all the clients, and he later converts to Catholicism, and then he wills to be buried himself. If you can see him, he is buried, right? Can you see him? Joseph, Kenzo Tange over there. He is buried under the cathedral. Make sure they won't destroy this building. So. Then around the same time, going back to Takamatsu, other sectors like 114 Bank headquarters, Nikkei Sekkei 1966 is amazing bronze facade. It's incredible. And interiors are all done by Nagare, Masayuki Nagare. And another Kagawa Prefecture Cultural Hall by Hiroshi Oe, done in 1965. Hiroshi Oe is a classmate of Tange's in University of Tokyo, and he was commissioned it because his family is shrine carpenters. So he is much more knowledgeable about Tange than traditional Japanese techniques in interiors and traditionally built, but with modern design. And then Tadashi Yamamoto, I mentioned before, the city architect, goes on, and he actually helps Isamu Noguchi bring traditional folk house and restores it and built another stone building for Izumi-san. But he also builds a museum for folk history museum in Setoguchi in 1974. In it, you can see the stonework. He collaborated with Izumi-san to do this amazing technique of stone building. Other examples in nearby Takamatsu is Sakaide Artificial Ground by Masato Otaka. It took him a long time, 68 to 86. Tadashi Yamamoto is involved. Also Asada-san, who used to work for Tange, who is also from that region, had did a lot of master plan, and then he had that master plan of a previous museum site and also helped a master plan of this. And I have to say this is one of a few built example of metabolism ideals of artificial ground in which we are public and private share the space together, and then there's a relationship of multiple retail, and then parking, and then also housing is built on top of auditorium. There's very intense, dense examples of this. And interior of this auditorium to me is incredibly beautiful, and acoustically it works. And also there's very rare example. I say rare, I think the only housing project by Tange ever. And it's a low-cost and low-income public housing. Originally, it was built in 1959, and it was demolished. The new one, his office, rebuilt in 1984. In our archives, we found in 1959 drawing signed by Kishio Kurakawa. So this was like an interesting thing about research about really going through this. Or going back to gymnasium in Kagawa, which I showed like that, Arata Isozaki, as a very junior architect, worked on that. So you can just imagine that you can see Arata Isozaki influence in that. So this is quite an amazing, it's still functioning, nearly 100% occupied. Going back to Genichiro Inokuma, his town's Marugame, he commissions and collaborates with Yoshio Taniguchi to build his own contemporary art museum in 1991, which just looks like that. And it's not only his work, but also to constantly exhibit work of contemporary architects. So, Koa is a very generous person. He was introducing Tange, introducing Noguchi, and then also promoting work of Yoshio Taniguchi. In my opinion, this is one of his best work ever, Taniguchi's. And then also provide spaces for other artists to exhibit in it. And also he actually makes it part of a building, a public library, accessible to everybody. So this is an unusually generous artist. And later in 2005, Yoshio Taniguchi makes a Higashiyama Kai Setouchi Art Museum. From there, you can actually have amazing view of Seto Bridge going into Honshu, as you can see that. And as you know, the Naoshima project is also in Kagawa Prefecture, started in 1985. And before that, in 70s, Kaneko and town mayor Miyake had collaborated together, and they had shared vision for Naoshima. And then Benesse Corporation, which is Fukutake publishers, they came and then invested and made up a Naoshima project as a private-public partnership. So this is an amazing project. And Chichu Museum, Ando Tadao Ando, his own museum. I like this photograph because it is a skylight, but it's the tiniest skylight I know. And then project by Sugimoto in Naoshima. And of course, you can actually see how he looks at the sea, and he reproduces similar ideas in Odawara Foundation, as you know. And of course, Yayoi Kusama, you can't forget her site installations. And they actually enlarged their territory to Inushima, where Seirensho Art Museum is built with Symbolism in Yanagi, 2008. And Symbolism is a local architect who is, this museum is built without any mechanical system. It's completely naturally ventilated. It has comfort and heat, climate control is all done naturally. And he has an office in Hiroshima. Yanagi also has an atelier on an island off Onomichi. So it's a local artist, but Yanagi did go to Yale and studied there, and he did have exhibitions here in New York in storefront for art and architecture, so they're both incredibly globally connected. Sambuchi studied in Denmark, Danish Architecture Academy. He just won a Verlax Award recently. And Inoshima IE project, where interventions is Kazuyo Sejima continues from 2010, and many artists project and some of our installations. And you can recall this is a tribute to Ehime project by Tange. And this is one of our latest project. And Teshima Art Museum by Yue Nishizawa, 2010. Again, this is a cast in place incredible dome. I couldn't photograph the real one, but this is just the entrance pavilion, but the same technique. As a result of it, there's a Setoguchi Archi-tourism has started, and it's actually a collaboration of 7 prefecture, which I think is unusual. And one of the reasons I'm doing a research is that this is such a great example for many parts in the world where they are not the major cities, not attracting tourism, but if those prefectures get together, make a tourist route, and collaborate together, it starts to make it work. Okayama is spearheading it, and then Hiroshima is also providing an important platform. I have to say that both of the governors came from private sector, and they went to Stanford University and they're MBA. So they're incredibly progressive governors. And then they're practicing what Kaneko said, the politics and art should benefit the populace, and they actually believe in it. So again, it comes all this time, like in the 50, 60 years, but we also have this progressive governors, and also Kagawa governor also, they are promoting it. I just showed a slide of twins. Some of you know Matsukuma twins. They are the most famous preservationist in Japan, and older brother, they're born like a minute before him, twins, and with eyeglasses. He's a professor at Kyoto Institute of Technology, and he's head of Docomomo Japan. He writes enormously. He's helping to advise this 7 prefecture groups. And then the younger brother works for Takenaka, and he was helpful in terms of preserving Chochukyo, Koji Fujii house most recently. So the younger brother is really preserving houses, 20 houses, and older brother is focused on institutional building. That's a very good family efforts, in my opinion. Other parts of Setoguchi I would show quickly is Onomichi. Shinshoji recently had commissioned Terinobu Fujimori to do reception building. Or it's called Sandwich, is a collective for Kohei Nawa, have done this kote. And going into Okayama, as I mentioned before, Okayama had a very much of a terroir of a culture. For example, this Notre Dame Sacred Heart College by Anthony Raymond was built in 1929. Okayama avoided the bombing. So this is still remaining, and I did not know this still exists, and Professor Matsukuma didn't know, and we were so flabbergasted. Again, it's impeccably maintained, and it's a very important building. And also, Okayama has Ohara Museum, some of you may know, which is built in 1930. So they have this terroir of patronage of art and architecture going on. And they commissioned Okayama Prefecture building by Maekawa, 1957, again, earlier than Kawa Prefecture. It's a very major, large area. And also commissions Maekawa to do Tenjin Yamaculture Plaza, 1962. And Hayashibara Art Museum in 1963, which also mixes the traditional buildings and contemporary building in a very skillful way. And one of the important things about it, as a result, Setoguchi Art Festival, which started in 2010, and 2019 is 4th Triennale, And it has been attracting enormous amount of tourists. Last version attracted 1 million people. It produced $139 million of income. And then in terms of foreign visitors, whenever they have this festival, entire foreign visitors picks up in Japan. So it became a very important resource. So I show this Setoguchi region as a very important idea of a regional collaboration and generosity in patronage, and how, yes, after started from zero after the bombing, that they built this up. I will show just 2 humble projects of mine, which is partially, a lot is inspired by this, because when I was young, my father took me to see the Tange building, and exhibit inside is scary. Any of you have been there? Right? I mean, it's very raw material. You see kids going in there crying. They're so scary. And I was 9 or 10 years old. I was too old to cry. I'm too proud. But I had nightmares all along about this. And my father wanted to instill in me and my brother, you cannot ever participate in any effort to do with war. And I mean, so in a sense, idea of a peace factory was instilled in it. So this idea of impact of that was important. And also the story of Kagawa Prefecture building, how it was also built from nearly nothing to everything. So I was invited to do a cultural center in Dakar, far from Dakar, 7 hours drive in Senegal, where it's very underserved community, nothing. By Albers, Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. And Joseph Albers' dictum is minimum means for maximum effect. And Annie Albers always said, everything comes from nothing. So what do you, as an architect, do from ground zero? This is a kind of similar ground zero in which remote, there are people poor, and then suffering from diseases. But for 20 years, Albers Foundation has been working in that area to stabilize it, to reduce maternal mortality and infant mortality. So we were able to enter into it after they established clinics, established kindergarten, farming school. There's a cultural center so that 12 tribes in this area can continue to live peacefully. This is like this is the landscape, and on the architecture there was an African hut. People are beautiful, very artistic, and then this is the only thing they knew how to build. And how do you work with this? So it's just, in my head, is think of what Tange and everybody else used to do after the bombing. This was worse. At least people had lives and people alive, and no one died. So we did propose a building which is based upon geometry, basic geometry for African hut, but with collaboration with Jörg Schreich's office, made it much larger into cultural center, but using existing bamboo material and technique of local people to build larger center and earth bricks from land, and then thatched roof. Everybody came to help. They should be going to school, but they were like very excited about it. But they were actually learning skills also, so they're helping out. And the thatch man, they had to make a big roof, but it's thicker than usual to make it more insulated. And then, so that it's very hot in this area, like 110 degrees, and inside of the center is much cooler, and also promote ventilation. Thatch roof is not all solid. So through the permeation, there's amazing stack effect. One can actually work with this. This is the people working together. And everybody's working here, and I'd like you to notice the floor, which is discarded tiles, broken tiles, and from Dakar, which is worthless, same as what Tadashi Yamamoto did for prefecture building, is to make it, and they people actually made DIY their own floor like this. So in a sense, there's a lot of inspiration from material use and ideas. Yes, it's a completely different area, but this cultural center has been in operation for 4 years now, and they have artists in residence. They have now about 75 artists came, both locally, internationally, And they have provided performances and also spaces for kids to play. And at the same time, this center provides about 30% of water. The roof is sloped to procure rainwater during the rain season. And this area that did not have a rainwater collection practice because they depended on wells, but because of climate change, aquifer is reducing, and therefore if one village digs a well, the other villages' wells dry up. So it's a real crisis, so the idea is to have a means to procure rainwater into a cistern so they can save it. If they can save it, they can definitely survive through, so the girls and women don't have to go far to procure water and then girls are missing schools and it's dangerous and so forth. But the idea is 30% of village need can be procured by this. So that's actually how it's done. The cover is done by Taiyo Kogyo, donation of very amazing high-tech, very lightweight, but it keeps water cool. So this is very easy to, it's the only high-tech thing we have, and we have a mesh version of that. So it helps to keep cool water and helps not to evaporate. And because of the water, the women started to have agricultural collective, and it became a source for selling okra, eggplants that sell high prices as opposed to perhaps onions. And they are growing moringa, which is also very high iron herb, sells very high prices. And they were able to grow fonio. It's kind of gluten-free grain. It's like alternative for quinoa. And then they have this honey because it's shea butter, the shea nuts and the moringa. So it has the incredible nutrients in this honey. So they became an economic source for it as well. Performance, and they were coming together to play, and Japanese government noticed it, and then they said, there's a cartoon of me holding a model over there. And lo and behold, Time noted this place as one of 100 world's greatest places. The villagers saying, like, I don't know what to do, like if tourists come. So I show you last project as a continuation of this project. After 4 years, they were asking for us to help them build a school, elementary school. And I took idea from ancient collective dwelling. It's like a donut type of dwelling. And it's a one-room schoolhouse, really. And 3 enclosed classrooms and 3 courtyards, and teachers' residence and bathrooms. So it's very simple. And our roof has 6 different sections so that none of the classrooms are the same. It's open air. And 3 classrooms because we only have 2 teachers for 3 classrooms. So the teachers can run around, give assignment, and run to the next classroom, going around like that. So that's what happens here. So it's a thatched roof, and same people who built, the team built the thread as a first project is able to build it. But also it was next to the clinic. I failed to mention the thread is also next clinic. This is the outpost of the same clinic. And so in a sense, public health is a part of education as well. And this just opened this February. And this is for kids, about 280 kids, age 6 to 10. And one of the things, as I mentioned before, thatched roof can be very cool. So outside it's 105 degrees. When I was there, we were being cooked inside about 85 degrees. So the kids like to come to school because it's cool. It's because they like it. And also it has enough light, because there's strong light, and it's shaded for them to study in there. And the comfort really attracts the kids. Otherwise, the institutional schools are corrugated metal on top of concrete blocks. So when kids go to school, they get cooked inside. When it rains, it's too noisy. So it just is not very attractive. If the kids want to skip school, I don't blame them, because it's just, why do you want to be in school? So the idea is to come up with a school which doesn't feel institutional, more like houses, meeting with new families. And then And also the windows, some kids are tall, but most of the kids are too short, so that they have a kids' privacy, but high enough ventilation. So this is actually latest school in a way. So this region is emerging to be stable with education and culture. And I think it's kind of as an architect, as lessons I learned from all the efforts that have been done by architects and artists in Setoguchi region, like you have all these wishes, but in a way, like we hope that maybe in the future that they would actually come to get together and have a new seed, planting a new seed. Perhaps 50, 60 years later, it becomes something like a regional development. So I just want to share with you these stories and how me as an architect may be inspired by the work of past generation of architects and then learn the lessons in practice into future. So thank you very much.
Thank you for what seems like an amazing journey in Japan.
Yes.
And to be capped off by these extraordinary projects in Africa. And I imagine many of the audience know your work here in the United States, but for those who don't, we may help them to connect the ethic behind, let's say, your cultural background, your educational upbringing, and the transformability of a practice that is not born out of a style, but rather a series of what I like to call ethics. Many people today talk about engagement with communities, working bottom up, building consensus, understanding their rituals, and in many cases, actually, the democratic process diffuses design to such a degree that it's the social act that matters and less the architecture. But somehow what you've been able to show is that design matters. Can you help us better understand, both in Japan as well as in your work, in what ways you think that the work is working from bottom up without any prejudices going into the work, working with the community, working with processes of making, and in what ways you're working top down, that there are ideas, if you like, that are universal or that they are powerful as images, such that they bring together communities, often fragmented in their own ways, to something that's larger than the sum of their parts.
So that's an excellent question. That's actually the question for all the architects. So how we do the work. But as you can imagine, in example of Tange's work in post-World War Japan, he really had to have some iconic element in his design to bring people together. And if there's nothing, and then there's no hope, and all you see are burned ground, and something has to rise. And what is that icon? I think he was in search of it all his life, as to how do we bring people together. But at the same time, he always writes that it's really places, it's open spaces, public space, which is more important than the buildings that bring people together. And he talks quite a lot about that. So I think it exists. So in a sense, the spaces, the use of spaces are much more democratic and maybe bottom up. And then buildings, there's this iconic relationship that has to happen. In both circumstances in Hiroshima and also in Africa, what's common is that those people had no choice. They couldn't choose between what different designs. So as architects, we had to offer the best we can ever conceive of in the situations, because you could make a mistake and then you could think that you could give them less than the best, and they certainly cannot survive with it. So there's like architects are put into a certain place where survival of a community does depend on good design or excellent design, or it may not survive. It's a very scary situation.
In speaking about Japan and Africa, I'm looking at you, and without getting into too much of a deep biography, I do think it's important to remind us where you come from culturally, where you come from educationally, and what have you learned along the way. I ask this question because many have asked me in the past, how has Iranian culture impacted me? And I'm always embarrassed to say, well, I've only lived there for 4 years and I'm a foreigner to my own country. And that I entered into an understanding of culture through the images, the sights, and the sounds of South Africa, of Pakistan, of many places, and Iran came rather late to me. In fact, towards the end of my architectural education at RISD, when that question was first posed, when I went to the library to unearth, as it were, something that I could relate to. In many ways, I used to call myself an Argentinian architect, if only because of my pedagogue, my teachers, exactly. Can you unpack for us a little bit the mindset and of your thinking, and to what degree is your return to Japan a homecoming, or to what degree are you a foreigner in your own land, and what are the ethics that you think are come with a certain foundational stronghold, and what are the things that you've gained to be able to translate them into cultural terms that are as relevant for Saratoga, New Canaan, and Senegal?
So that's a difficult question, but I think what's interesting thing about, as an example, I showed Tange, Inokuma, Nagare, and Isamu Noguchi. They were, and George Nakashima, they are either Americans or Japanese, but they were just global citizens. Yeah. And I think that's how I learned that they really showed us how to operate beyond the national borders and within the confines of national culture. So that's the first generation which really transcended the national barriers or national pride or national associations, and learned to relate to others outside, and then to be other and to see the culture they have seen with a critical eye. So I think of a generation learning from it. And of course, I grew up in Japan till high school. I came to high school in New York. I stayed here, but my family is still there. But if you are educated till age 14 or 15 in Japan, that's I had a very fundamental, or in Japanese called gimu kyoiku. It's dutiful. I had basic education to qualify, and I read enormously. I liked Japanese literature, and my grandmother used to take me to Kyoto every weekend, because that's where my aunt used to live. So as a child growing up, I was really deeply familiar with the culture, architecture, and literature. So in a sense, yes, I'm here, but I still am very much deeply into the culture of it. I still read the books, and I actually still read faster in Japanese than English. It's like, so I'm an avid reader still. So, but I live here, so I'm basically a New Yorker, and I don't know if it actually says anything about myself, but I think idea is to being away from my own culture, one starts to have a sensibility of understanding the other person, and especially a lot of people who are not with the home. There's migrants, there's immigrants, and refugees, and even in community in Africa, they are not with the tribes. It's such a mobile time in our world that I think understanding where origin is important, but really more understanding, having empathy for those who are not in the original circumstance, many people are not fortunate enough to be in the safety and comfort of the original environment they were born into. So,
you know, it's a rare occasion that I'll meet somebody from Cooper Union who does not remind me of the impact that institution has had on them. Some talk about their education there as a process of unlearning, in the sense that to some degree you have to, in order to make it through Cooper Union, you have to shed yourself of all of the preconceptions of educational models that you come into the school with, and that you relearn it, looking through critical eyes at the world and through the modalities of architecture, whether they're formal, spatial, or material. Did you go through the same transition, and did it form a new identity for you, and how did it? I'm curious really more for selfish reasons now. I'm trying to come to terms with the myriads of voices that come from Cooper Union. We outsiders commonly think of the Cooper Union as a monolith, but the more people I meet, the more we realize how it has given birth to so many different voices. And I wonder how you came to Cooper Union, and who were the, besides John, who were the other ones who have impacted you, and how that education differs from the issues that we're dealing with now, and how did it form you?
Right, okay. NADAAA is very, very humble. I mean, he's like amazing educator, and then like I think you are very, to me, you are quintessentially a Cooper Union person, because you're interested in making, you're interested in ideas. So this idea, the Cooper as monolithic, isolated, insular culture is probably wrong. Yeah. And then people of similar ideas join and collect, like now you're leading it. It's certain ethos. And then you have this idea of a nearly perfectionism and discipline and rigor, and all that is part of the process in which we were taught to approach it. And as time goes on, I think if you don't have to be educated anymore, because some of us live there and some of them practicing, and all this ethos spread around. So there are so many people who feel like they went to Cooper, but they didn't, and they should belong to this school for the future. And I think you are like a perfect person, in my opinion, in that case. But talking about my teachers, John Hayek was one, Raymond Abraham, Todd Williams, Ricardo Scofidio is one, and then Richard Meyer was floating somewhere there, and then Spocek was there, Charlie Gosme was there, and and Bernard Chumi. We have some amazing, diverse teachers, and you don't really put them all in a category as a Cooper. So I think what Cooper Union was great is the history of team teaching, in which you have to be strong individual to speak in front of professors who may have completely different ideas, like between Raymond Abraham and John Haydock and Peter Eisenman. It's like, that's very tough. So if anything, I think Cooper Union helps you to educate yourself as who you are, your individual. And I think I've never seen no student that work alike. So we're told not to imitate your professors. Everything is coming from within yourself. This originality and productivity were highly important. So that's as simple as that. So.
You named some characters there: Haydock, Abraham, Scofidio, Meyer, Polshek, Gwathmey, Schumi. And when you think of these architects, and albeit it is from a generation and there were different priorities, but you don't really associate any of these with the building of communities. And I wonder, and given the work that you have been doing in preservation or in additions to significant buildings, whether of Rudolph or of Wright, or these works in Africa, the imperative to speak another language, or the language of the other, seems like a latent imperative in your work, and I don't associate that with any of the figures that were your teachers. But maybe you can also describe a little bit to what degree that education was focused on how we engage the world, or alternatively, how the educational moment is a bracketed moment where you suspend reality in order to get deeply immersed in the medium in which an art or architecture works, if only to unleash it once you've mastered certain things in order to re-engage communities. But I wonder, from a pedagogical point of view, how do you think about this? Do you believe that you should learn by going out there in the world, or do you like this idea of the insular and monastic focus on the mastery of material? Looking at this joint, for instance, one cannot but be in awe of how that was done without understanding what impact it has on the community in the more immediate sense. And I wonder how you see yourself as an extension of this culture, and what have you done fundamentally differently than your predecessors?
Well, I think the previous generation had been quite it's almost style oriented, and particularly about a very much, how would I say, protective of one's identity. And as a student, you perceive that. So as a student, you're not only learning from a master's, but you'll be critical of masters. And then as a student, you're the one who has to go to next generation. You think does that model survive, right? So in a sense, that how does it work out? And the teachers of ours who actually went on to engage with communities and arts and so forth, Todd Williams and Rick Scofidio, they formed partnerships with Liz Dilla and Billy Chen. They went into much more engagement model. So they have changed the practice. And I think that's actually they're successful in that way, but they evolve. And some of my teachers never evolved. Bernard Chumi also evolved in an incredible way. Peter Eisenman probably, Peter Eisenman, Richard Meyer said Richard Meyer, Raymond Abrams, and so much. So there are diverse models of practice, but as a students, you do become critical and you are aware of it. And I think one knows that they can be safe in their own realm, but as a student, you have to forge ahead with some alternative, and that's when you actually start to engage in different scales of observation, like in details and implication of that wood details into global culture, where does it wood come from, who made it, life cycle, all that question comes in as young people.
I know that we're running out of time slowly, but I want to maybe prompt one final question for you, if it's not too long and too heavy, but...
it's been long and heavy.
Obviously, we're living in big times. Sometimes I look out there and I believe that we're living in a history now. Sometimes we're not conscious of the history that we're living in. These days, every day I wake up, I feel I'm living through history. But given the way in which sometimes architecture recedes into the background of political reality, there are certain global urgencies at stake. And in many ways, the agency of architecture is becoming also quite self-evident. What do you think are the urgencies of today, whether political or otherwise, and in what ways do you think architecture enters into that discussion?
That's another big question.
Sorry.
But of course, I think to me the issue number one is climate change. I think from there everything evolved, from migration, the women's rights. It's like if without environment, without protecting environment, will be obsolete, will be extinct. I think upstairs exhibition even says about human being extinct. And then Werner Herzog's new movie about Bruce Chatwin says we end up, we are no longer nomads, and there's been an end of civilization and broken nature. And by Paolo Antonelli says, how can we be extinct elegantly? So this, everybody is talking about these ideas, but as an architect, we deal with environment. We are responsible. And I think that's a very concrete action one can make in at least, like some of the buildings I make is procures its own resources on its footprint. I think that's the basic things we can think about. This whole sustainability. It's like, that should be a common sense, for example. And I think, but it's not just energy and environment. The whole thing is ecology, is about communities. So larger idea, larger factors, how to deal with climate change, I think it kind of embraces everything. And I think we should be very vocal about that. Already we're vocal about that. But
Toshiko, you've opened our eyes to a wealth of Japanese images tonight, capped off by two projects of incredible eloquence.
Thank you.
That are only a small fragment of the oeuvre that defines your many works. And I want to thank you so much for making this night possible.
Thank you, Nadia.